My name is Captain Sonia Weiss. I'm 29 years old, and I'm a lawyer in the U.S. Army JAG Corps. But in this suffocating civilian courtroom in Tacoma, my uniform and my rank meant nothing. I was just the daughter of a dead woman. My father, Leonard Wright, a powerhouse attorney, looked at me across the polished mahogany table, his eyes cold and devoid of any kinship. He turned to his own lawyer, his voice just loud enough for me to hear. Just drag it out. She's a soldier who's used to taking orders. She doesn't have the patience or the money for a real fight. The words stabbed at me like shards of ice, but the cruelest blow came when he spoke of my mother's military footlocker. That thing is just a pile of worthless memorabilia from a failed woman. Sonia, what are you even clinging to it for? He was wrong. He had no idea that in that pile of worthless memorabilia, my mother had left behind the evidence that could destroy the entire empire of lies he had built. Before I get into my story, let me know how your day is going, happy or sad. Support me by hitting the like and subscribe button if you've ever been dismissed by your own family and had everything you cherish denied. The air inside the Pierce County courtroom was as cold and damp as the November sky outside. A relentless Pacific Northwest drizzle clung to the tall windows, blurring the gray world beyond into a watercolor of melancholy. I sat with my back ramrod straight, a military habit I couldn't shake even in my charcoal gray civilian suit. Across the room, my father, Leonard Wright, stood before the judge's bench. He was a master of this stage, his voice a smooth, confident baritone as he argued for a fifth continuance in the settlement of my mother's estate. Your Honor, he began, his tone dripping with false sincerity. The complexity of these military asset documents requires more time for a thorough review. I watched the subtle, nonverbal exchange between him and Judge Alcott. A slight lift of an eyebrow from my father, a knowing, almost imperceptible nod from the judge. It was a perfectly choreographed piece of theater. Alcott, a retired Army colonel himself, leaned forward sympathetically. I understand, Leonard, matters concerning a service member's estate can be intricate. They were talking about my mother, Elena Foster, a humble woman whose most valuable assets were a small townhouse and a worn-out Ford sedan. But in their hands, her simple legacy was being twisted into some ludicrous matter of national security. My lawyer, Clara, stood to object. Her voice, usually so sharp and commanding, was swallowed by the thick, suffocating atmosphere of collusion between two powerful men. They were West Point classmates, a fact they'd made sure to mention at the start of the hearing, reminiscing about old professors. They had established their territory. This was their club, and I was an unwelcome guest. But Leonard wasn't finished. His legal objective was secured. Now came the personal attack. He turned, his face a mask of paternal concern. Your Honor, if I may, he said, his gaze sweeping over me with practiced pity. My daughter, Sonia, has been under a great deal of pressure. Her overseas deployments were strenuous. I'm concerned her emotions may be clouding her judgment in this matter. There it was, the classic maneuver. It wasn't a legal argument, it was a psychological assassination. In 2 sentences, he had reframed my persistence as a symptom of PTSD. He had turned my strength into a sign of instability. I felt the blood rush to my face, a hot, angry tide. He wasn't just trying to win a case anymore. He was trying to invalidate my entire being, stripping me of my credibility as an officer and a lawyer in one clean, vicious stroke. I saw the shift in the eyes of the few people in the gallery. Pity, concern, the look you give someone who is unwell. I was no longer Captain Weiss, a capable attorney fighting for her mother's honor. I was just a poor, damaged soldier in my father's carefully crafted play. The hearing ended moments later. The continuance was granted, of course. I walked out without looking at him, the sound of my heels clicking on the marble floor, the only evidence of the rigid control I was exerting over myself. I sat alone in my old Ford sedan, the engine off, listening to the rhythmic slap of the windshield wipers against the relentless rain. The gray Tacoma waterfront was a blur of shipping cranes and fog. Here, in the solitude of my car, the memories he had stirred up broke free. I was 17 again, standing in the high school auditorium, the valedictorian sash feeling heavy on my shoulders. I scanned the rows of proud parents, searching for his face. It wasn't there. He had called that morning, not from his office in Seattle, but from a golf course at Pebble Beach. I could hear the faint whoosh of a golf swing in the background. "This deal is just too important, sweetheart," he'd said, his voice distant and breezy. "We'll celebrate when I get back." My mother, Elena, sat alone in the bleachers. She smiled and waved, her camera held high. But I could see the sadness in her eyes, a shadow she could never quite hide. She never spoke a bad word about him, not once. When I'd come home, angry and hurt, she just smoothed my hair and said, "He has his own burdens, honey." Burdens. Now I understood. His burden was a bottomless, all-consuming selfishness. He hadn't just missed my graduation. He had systematically erased himself from every important moment of my life, leaving my mother to fill the empty space he left behind. And now, he wanted to erase her, too. To dismiss her life, her service, her memory, as nothing more than the worthless memorabilia of a failed woman. My hands tightened on the cold leather of the steering wheel. I squeezed my eyes shut, and in the darkness, my mother's last words to me echoed, as clear as if she were sitting in the passenger seat. We were in her sterile hospital room, the scent of antiseptic hanging in the air. She was frail, but her voice was firm. "Don't let him define my life, Sonia," she'd commanded, "and you must never, ever let him define yours." It wasn't a dying wish. It was an order. My eyes snapped open, the storm of emotion inside me, the anger, the grief, the profound sense of injustice, receded, replaced by a cold, sharp clarity. The disciplined mind of a soldier took over. I analyzed the battlefield, the enemy's tactics, the objective. This was no longer a civil suit over an estate. This was a campaign. A fight for my mother's honor and for my own. And in a campaign, you don't back down. You don't surrender. I turned the key in the ignition. The engine of the old Ford roared to life, a raw, defiant sound that cut through the steady drumming of the rain. It was a silent declaration of war, lost in the gray Tacoma afternoon. But I heard it. And I knew, with absolute certainty, that he would hear it soon enough. Driving back from the courthouse, the city of Tacoma felt like a ghost town through my rain-streaked windshield. I ended up at my mother's small townhouse in the North End, the place I was now fighting for. The house was quiet, filled with the faint, lingering scent of lavender potpourri she used to keep in little bowls on the bookshelves. My eyes landed on the object in the corner of the living room, the one my father had dismissed with such contempt. Her olive-drab military footlocker. It sat there like a silent, stoic sentinel. The paint was faded, the corners dented, the surface crisscrossed with scratches from years of being moved from one military base to another. It was a silent artifact from a life I only knew in fragments. My father had always mocked it. He'd called it her junk trunk, a relic of a past she should have left behind. But to my mother, it was sacred. I remember watching her on quiet Sunday afternoons, carefully wiping down its surface with a soft cloth, her movements gentle and reverent. Once, when I was about 10, I found her sitting on the floor beside it, the lid open. She was holding an old, tarnished medal in her palm, just staring at it, her gaze a million miles away. I'd asked her what it was for. She just smiled, a sad, distant smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Just old memories, sweetie," she'd said, closing the lid. Just old memories. Now, standing here in the echoing silence of her home, I realized that smile was a curtain, hiding an entire story I'd never been told. My hand drifted to the cold metal latch, and a memory, sharp and unwelcome, flooded my mind. The last Thanksgiving we ever spent together as a family. I was 14. My mother had spent 2 whole days preparing. The little house was warm and fragrant, filled with the rich, earthy smells of sage stuffing and roasting pumpkin pie. It was the one day a year she tried to create the illusion of a perfect family. Leonard arrived late, of course. He tossed his cashmere coat over a chair, looked at the perfectly set table with a sigh of weary obligation, and sat down. My mother brought out the turkey, golden brown and glistening, and placed it in the center of the table. She carved him the first slice of breast meat, placing it on his plate with a hopeful look. He speared it with his fork, chewed it once, twice, with a look of detached analysis. Then he set his fork down. "Elena," he said, not with malice, but with a casual cruelty that was far worse. "You really ought to try the turkey at Canlis. It's far more moist. The chefs there brine it for 48 hours. The warm, festive air in the room instantly turned to ice. My aunt shifted uncomfortably. My uncle suddenly found the pattern on his plate fascinating. I felt hot tears sting the back of my eyes, a wave of shame and anger washing over me. All of her effort, all of her love, dismissed in a single sentence. My mother didn't say a word. She just quietly stood up, picked up his plate, and said, "Let me warm that up for you, dear." Her voice was steady, betraying nothing. That was the last holiday he ever spent with us. After the quiet, carefully managed divorce, my mother never asked him for a thing. She just worked. She worked with a quiet, relentless determination that I only now understand was a form of survival. She kept her job as a records clerk at the county office, but I'd later find out she'd also taken a second job, working the night shift as a cashier at the Safeway over on Pearl Street. Some nights, I'd wake up for a glass of water and see the kitchen light still on. I'd peek around the corner and see her slumped over the small kitchen table, surrounded by a sea of envelopes. Bills, pay stubs, bank statements. The weight of the world seemed to be resting on her tired shoulders. But she never complained. She never let me see the struggle. When I got my acceptance letter to the University of Washington, she celebrated by opening a $10 bottle of sparkling wine. Her joy was so pure, so absolute, it lit up the entire house. It was years before I learned the truth from my aunt. To make the initial housing deposit for my dorm room, my mother had sold her mother's gold locket, the only piece of real jewelry she owned. That sacrifice, that act of profound love, was what Leonard had dismissed as failure. A hot knot of anger and grief tightened in my chest. He lived in a waterfront mansion on Lake Washington while she sold off pieces of her past to build my future. I slid down to the floor, the worn carpet rough against my jeans, and pressed my cheek against the cold, unyielding metal of the footlocker. The past and present collided in that single point of contact. And then another memory surfaced, quieter this time. Late afternoons in the kitchen, the smell of dinner cooking, and the sound of the radio. My mother often listened to NPR, and sometimes a woman's warm, thoughtful voice would fill the space, talking about things I didn't fully understand then: courage, shame, vulnerability. It was Brené Brown. My mom loved listening to her. A phrase from one of those talks echoed in my mind now: a life raft in a sea of confusion. Vulnerability is not weakness. It's our most accurate measure of courage. I wonder how many of us grew up watching a parent, especially a mother, who was strong in her silence, who carried burdens we never knew about. If you had a quiet hero like that in your life, please support me by hitting the like button, and in the comments, just type one word: hero. Let's fill the comments with a tribute to them. Maybe my mother's silence wasn't resignation. Maybe it wasn't failure. Maybe, just maybe, it was a soldier's tactical choice to protect what was most important. Maybe it was a form of courage that I, a trained officer taught to face every threat head-on, was only just beginning to comprehend. The footlocker felt different now. No longer just a box of old memories, but a puzzle box, a legacy waiting to be understood. The weeks that followed blurred into a grueling war of attrition. My father wasn't fighting me in the courtroom anymore. He was fighting me in my daily life, and he was using his most effective weapon: money. The legal bills from Clara's firm began to arrive, each one a stark white reminder of my dwindling resources. My savings, carefully accumulated over years of disciplined living, evaporated like mist in the Washington sun. Every motion my father's lawyers filed, every request for another delay, was a direct assault on my bank account. It was a strategy I recognized from my psychological warfare training: the slow squeeze. Starve the enemy of resources until surrender is their only option. My life began to shrink. The small luxury of a morning latte from the Starbucks on 6th Avenue was the first to go. I started brewing my own coffee at home, the bitter taste a constant reminder of my financial reality. Dinners became simple affairs of pasta with jarred sauce or eggs and toast. I started tracking every dollar, the mental fatigue of constant budgeting wearing me down almost as much as the legal battle itself. Leonard knew exactly what he was doing. He was strangling me, slowly, methodically, hoping I would simply run out of air. Late one night, staring at my bank balance on my laptop screen, I felt a familiar frustration. I remembered a lecture I'd once read from General Martin Dempsey, a former chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. He spoke about integrity in the face of adversity, about holding on to your core values when everything around you is trying to strip them away. I closed the laptop. My values weren't for sale. Not yet, anyway. Then came the attack on a different front. My career. The call I had been dreading came on a Tuesday afternoon. The caller ID showed a number from Fort Bragg. It was my commanding officer, Colonel Miller. His voice was calm, professional, but the message was as clear as a gunshot. "Sonia," he began, without any of the usual pleasantries. "I've received a few calls, inquiries. People are asking about you, about this civil case. It's generating some unwanted attention for the Corps." An icy chill snaked down my spine. It was happening. Leonard was pulling strings, using the network of powerful men he'd cultivated over 30 years to poison the well. My life as a soldier was built on a foundation of honor and reputation. He was trying to demolish it. "Sir," I started, trying to keep my voice even, "it's a private family matter." It stopped being a private matter when names started getting mentioned in legal circles, Captain. He cut me off, his voice hardening slightly. "The JAG Corps needs its officers focused, undistracted." There was a pause. "Resolve this, Captain. Whatever it takes." He hung up. The words, "whatever it takes," echoed in the silent room. It was a command wrapped in a suggestion. It implied compromise, settlement, retreat. It was an order to abandon the very integrity General Dempsey had spoken of. The place I considered my professional home, the institution I'd sworn an oath to, was now telling me to stand down. The feeling of isolation was crushing. Soon after, the harassment became less subtle. One evening, as I was taking the trash out to the curb, the flash of a camera blinded me for a second. A dark sedan I didn't recognize was idling at the end of the street. It sped off before I could get a good look. A few days later, I came out to my car to find a long, shallow scratch down the passenger side door. Not deep enough for an insurance claim, but a clear, unmistakable message. "We are watching you." The final straw came one evening when there was a soft knock on my door. It was Mrs. Henderson, my elderly neighbor from across the street. She was a sweet woman who always brought over a portion of her casserole whenever she made too much. Tonight, her face was etched with worry. "Sonia, dear," she said, clutching her robe tightly. "A man came by this afternoon, a nice-looking fellow in a suit, said he was from an insurance agency doing a neighborhood survey." She hesitated, wringing her hands. "But he asked odd questions about you. He asked if you seemed stressed, if I ever heard shouting from your house. He asked if you ever talked about having nightmares since you got back from your service." My blood ran cold. I thanked her, assured her everything was fine, and quickly closed the door. Leaning against it, I could feel my heart hammering against my ribs. It was a smear campaign. He was building a file, creating a narrative of an unstable veteran, a woman whose testimony couldn't be trusted because her mind was supposedly broken by war. It was the same tactic he'd used in the courtroom, but now it was leaking into my life, poisoning my reputation with the very people I shared a community with. That night, I sat in the dark kitchen, the only light coming from the street lamp outside, casting long shadows across the floor. The weight of it all, the financial strain, the pressure from the army, the constant, unnerving harassment pressed down on me. I felt the sharp edges of my resolve beginning to crumble. For the first time, I felt utterly and completely alone, a single soldier fighting a war on 3 fronts with no support and no end in sight. I picked up my phone, my thumb hovering over Clara's contact information. I could end it all right now. I could call her, tell her to take whatever deal he was offering. My mother's honor be damned. I just wanted it to be over. I was tired. So profoundly tired. Just as my thumb was about to press the screen, the phone vibrated in my hand, startling me. An unknown number with a 703 area code. Virginia. Probably a wrong number. I almost ignored it. But some instinct, some flicker of hope I didn't even know I had left, made me answer. "Is this Captain Sonia Weiss?" a woman's voice asked. It was crisp, no nonsense, and calm. "This is she," I said, my own voice raspy. "My name is Renee Barrett," the woman said. "I served with your mother, Elena Foster, a long time ago. I heard you were in some trouble. I think I might be able to help." Following Renee Barrett's instructions, I drove to the VFW post in South Tacoma. It was an old, unassuming brick building on a quiet street, the kind of place you'd drive by 1,000 times without noticing. But the American flag flying out front was immaculate, and the building itself, though aged, radiated a quiet dignity. I parked my car and took a deep breath before heading inside. The moment I stepped through the door, the scent of stale beer and freshly brewed coffee hit me. The signature perfume of every VFW hall in America. The air was filled with the low, warm murmur of conversations and the gentle clinking of pool balls from a table in the back. It felt safe. A handful of older veterans, nursing beers at the bar, looked up as I entered. They gave me a slow, respectful nod, the kind of silent acknowledgement that passes between soldiers. Renee Barrett was sitting at a small table in the corner, just as she'd said. She looked to be in her early 60s, with a short, practical haircut of silver hair and eyes that were sharp, intelligent, and missed nothing. She stood as I approached, and when she offered her hand, her grip was firm, solid. "Captain Weiss," she said, her voice even. "Thanks for coming." There was no pity in her eyes, no condescension, just respect. After weeks of being looked at like a fragile victim or a nuisance, that simple gesture of professional courtesy felt like a lifeline. "Thank you for calling," I replied, my voice a little unsteady. We sat down. The quiet hum of the hall enveloped us. It was a strange kind of sanctuary, surrounded by men who had seen the worst of the world and had come out the other side. Renee didn't waste time with small talk. She got straight to the point. "Sonia," she began, her gaze direct and unwavering. "Your father has been lying to you your entire life. Your mother wasn't just a records clerk. That was her cover. She was one of the best signals intelligence analysts the Air Force ever had." The words hit me with the force of a physical blow. The room seemed to tilt slightly on its axis. My mother? The quiet, gentle woman who tended her garden and listened to public radio? An intelligence analyst? It didn't make sense. Renee saw the disbelief on my face and continued, her voice low and urgent. "She was part of a highly classified operation back in the day. Codename, Blue Harbor. It was a joint service task force. Your father and Judge Alcott were there too, fresh out of law school as junior JAG officers." She paused, letting the information sink in. "They figured out a way to abuse their security clearance using classified intercepts for personal gain. Your mother found out. When she threatened to expose them, they destroyed her career and coerced her into a divorce settlement that guaranteed her silence." My mind was reeling, trying to process the flood of information. "Coerced her? How?" Renee's eyes softened for the first time, but her voice was hard as steel. "They used you, Sonia. They used her love for you. They made it clear that if she ever spoke a word, they would ensure her unstable military background would cause her to lose custody of her only child. They threatened your safety." Every word she spoke was a missing puzzle piece clicking into place, explaining years of unanswered questions. My mother's quiet sadness, her refusal to ever fight back, her insistence on protecting me from a world I never knew existed. Renee reached into her worn leather wallet and pulled out a faded photograph, sliding it across the table. I picked it up with a trembling hand. It was a picture of a young woman in an Air Force uniform, a confident, radiant smile on her face as she sat before a complex array of radio equipment. It was my mother, but a version of her I had never known. This wasn't Elena the gardener or Elena the quiet reader. This was Technical Sergeant Elena Foster. Powerful, capable, and in her element. Your mother was a warrior, Renee said, her voice thick with pride. There was this one time, a signals intercept came through, all garbled. It was a high-priority communication, but it was a mess. Officially, the mission was a bust. But Elena refused to give up. She knew a team was operating in the blind based on that intel. She stayed up for 36 hours straight, drinking black coffee, painstakingly decrypting that signal, piece by piece. It wasn't her direct order to do so. She did it because she knew that information would keep a dozen soldiers on the ground safe. She always put others first. Tears began to well in my eyes, blurring the image of the smiling young woman in the photo. But these weren't the tears of grief I had grown so used to. They were tears of understanding. Tears of fierce, overwhelming pride. My mother's silence hadn't been weakness. It was the strategic decision of a soldier protecting her home front. And I was her home front. Renee let me have a moment, then leaned in, her voice dropping to a near whisper. Elena knew this day might come, she said, her expression turning serious. She knew Leonard would never just let things be, so she left you an arsenal. There are others like me, Sonia. People who were loyal to Elena, who never forgot what they did to her. We've been watching. She placed her warm, steady hand over mine on the table. Look in her footlocker. She told me once, if anything ever happened, the key was the Winter Lantern. It was the code name for a sub-operation, a private log she kept. Her grip tightened slightly. We can't fight your legal battle for you, Captain. That's your territory. But we can give you the intelligence you need to win the war. This isn't just about your mother's house anymore. This is about restoring the honor of a good soldier who was betrayed by the very men who should have had her back. Do you understand? I looked from the photograph of the young warrior to the determined eyes of the older one, sitting across from me. The fog of despair that had enveloped me for weeks finally began to lift, burned away by the bright, clean fire of purpose. I gave a single, sharp nod. I understand, I said, my voice clear and strong for the first time in a long time. My mission was no longer just about defending a memory. It was about revealing a truth. The moment I left the VFW hall, I was on the phone with Clara, my voice a low, urgent torrent as I relayed everything Renee had told me. On the other end of the line, there was a long, stunned silence. When Clara finally spoke, her voice was stripped of its usual legal composure. Oh my God, Sonia, she breathed. This isn't an inheritance case, it's a cover-up. A 25-year-old cover-up. As she said it, she let out a sudden gasp. Wait a second, she said, her voice changing, the lawyer in her taking over again. Sonia, you're not going to believe this. I just got an email notification. It's a new filing from your father's attorney. I could hear the furious clicking of her keyboard. It's an emergency motion. They're petitioning the court to immediately seize and seal your mother's footlocker. On what grounds? I asked, my heart beginning to pound. Get this, Clara said, her voice dripping with incredulous irony. They're claiming it contains sensitive family heirlooms of significant historical value to the Wright family. They're painting you as an unstable daughter trying to abscond with precious family history. I had to smile, a cold, bitter smile. It was a desperate, clumsy move, and it told me everything I needed to know. The enemy had just confirmed their primary target. They weren't afraid of me. They were terrified of that footlocker. They had no idea I already had the key. That night, the house was utterly still except for the quiet hum of the refrigerator. I stood before the footlocker, the phrase Renee had given me echoing in my mind. Winter Lantern. It was an odd, poetic phrase, nothing like the direct, unambiguous language my mother usually used. I closed my eyes, trying to see my childhood home through her eyes, searching for a connection. And then it hit me. A small, seemingly insignificant memory. Every winter, as the gray Washington days grew shorter, my mother had a ritual. She would hang a delicate Japanese-style paper lantern on a hook on the back porch. It cast a soft, warm glow against the cold winter nights. She said it was to welcome the light back, a beacon of hope in the darkness. My pulse quickened. It wasn't a password. It was a place, a clue hidden in plain sight. With a surge of adrenaline, I carefully maneuvered the heavy footlocker away from the wall and tipped it onto its back. The underside was plain, dusty metal, except for 4 screws near the corners. 3 of them were worn and tarnished with age, but the 4th, in the bottom right corner, was slightly different. The slot was cleaner, the metal a fraction shinier, as if it had been turned more recently than the others. My hands were shaking slightly as I retrieved a screwdriver from the kitchen junk drawer. I worked carefully, my JAG school training on evidence handling kicking in. One by one, I loosened the old screws. When I got to the 4th one, it turned more easily. With the last screw out, I gently pried at the edge of the base plate with the flathead screwdriver. It didn't budge. My heart sank. Was I wrong? Then I remembered the lantern. A beacon. A light. I pushed the plate, not pulled. It slid sideways with a soft metallic groan, revealing a shallow, hidden compartment beneath. My mother, the woman I thought I knew, the woman of gardens and books and quiet smiles, was a master of tradecraft. My breath caught in my throat. Inside the compartment, there was no jewelry, no sentimental keepsakes. It was an intelligence file, meticulously organized. On top was a standard-issue military logbook. I opened it. My mother's handwriting, a neat, precise cursive, filled the pages. It was a detailed record of dates, times, and radio frequencies that were accessed without authorization during Operation Blue Harbor. Beneath the logbook were a series of black and white photographs. A young Leonard Wright and a young Richard Alcott, smiling, cocky, standing next to a bank of signals, monitoring equipment they had no business being near. And then, the final, chilling piece of the puzzle. A typed report, a threat analysis my mother had written and clearly never filed. It detailed how intelligence from those unauthorized intercepts was used to blackmail a state senator into voting for a lucrative defense contract. It outlined how they had illegally monitored a civil rights activist whose subsequent death in a fiery car accident was ruled a tragic misfortune. This wasn't just evidence of misconduct. This was a blueprint of their crimes. My training in analysis kicked in, my brain automatically sorting the information, applying the ACRT model: analyze, correlate, report, target. I had the analysis and correlation right here in my hands. The next steps were up to me. On the very top of the file was a single yellowed envelope sealed with wax. In my mother's elegant script, it simply said, "For Sonia." With trembling fingers, I broke the seal and unfolded the single sheet of paper inside. It wasn't from the analyst. It was from the mother. "My dearest Sonia," it began. "If you are reading this, it means my greatest fear has come to pass. I am so sorry I could never tell you the truth. My only mission since the day you were born was to protect you. The contents of this footlocker are dangerous, Sonia, but they are also the truth. Use them wisely. Use them to defend your honor and mine. But most importantly, whatever you do not let this fight harden your heart. Do not let their cynicism become your own. Always be the soldier of integrity I know you were born to be. That is the only legacy that truly matters." I folded the letter, a single hot tear tracing a path down my cheek and splashing onto the aged paper. The weight of her love, her foresight, her incredible strength settled over me. This was her final mission briefing. This was her true inheritance to me. Not a house, not a bank account, but a legacy of love, honor, and a demand for justice. The fight ahead was no longer just about the past. It was about fulfilling her last command. And I, Captain Sonia Weiss, would not fail. Armed with my mother's meticulously crafted arsenal of truth, I was no longer a plaintiff in an inheritance dispute. I was an officer with a mission. The objective was clear. I spent the evening on a video call with Clara, laying out the plan. "We don't take this to court. Not yet," I said, my voice firm. "The evidence is too volatile. If these documents are still classified, which they likely are, introducing them could get me disbarred or even prosecuted. We can't risk it." Clara nodded, her eyes wide as she stared at the scanned copies of the logbook on her screen. "So what's the play?" "A surgical strike," I answered. Psychological warfare. We use the evidence as leverage to force an unconditional surrender before the main battle begins. I paused, then added, and I'm delivering the terms in person. There was only one uniform for a mission like this. The next morning, I stood before my full-length mirror, not in a business suit, but in my Army service uniform. The deep blue jacket, the perfectly creased trousers, the polished brass on my belt. It was more than a uniform. It was a suit of armor forged from honor and discipline. I wasn't going to see my father. I was going to confront a disgraced former officer. His law firm occupied the 50th floor of the Columbia Center in downtown Seattle. Stepping out of the elevator, I entered a world of hushed tones, expensive art, and panoramic views of Elliott Bay. The entire office, a sea of paralegals and junior associates in tailored suits, fell silent as I walked in. My footsteps were soundless on the plush carpeting, but my presence was a thunderclap. I didn't look like a daughter coming to beg. I looked like a reckoning. Leonard's assistant, a young woman who looked barely out of college, stared at me with wide, startled eyes. "Captain Weiss, can I help you?" "I'm here to see Mr. Wright," I said, my voice calm and level. He was in a glass-walled conference room, mid-sentence. He saw me, and his expression flickered from annoyance to irritation. He held up a hand to his colleagues, smoothly ending the meeting, and motioned them out. As they filed past, they shot me curious, uneasy glances. Leonard closed the door to his private office and turned to me, his face a mask of controlled fury. "Sonia, what in God's name is this stunt? This is my place of business." I ignored the question. I walked past him, across the vast expanse of his office, to the massive mahogany desk that served as his throne. The city of Seattle sprawled below us like a kingdom. Without a word, I reached into my briefcase and placed a single, black and white photograph on his perfectly organized desk blotter. It was the picture of him and a young Richard Alcott, laughing beside the signals monitoring equipment from Operation Blue Harbor. The smug, self-assured mask on my father's face dissolved. It froze, then cracked. He stared down at the photograph, his skin turning a pale, ashen color. He looked from the picture to my face, and for the first time in my entire life, I saw genuine, undiluted panic in his eyes. "Where did you get this?" he hissed, his voice a dry rasp. I didn't raise my voice. I kept it low and steady, a lesson I'd learned in hostage negotiation training. Always speak from a position of strength, not aggression. "You have 48 hours, I said, my voice as cold and clear as the glass separating us from the sky. "You will withdraw the lawsuit. You will release all claims to my mother's estate, and you will issue a formal public apology for the slanderous statements you made about her character." He just stared at me, his mouth slightly agape. "If you fail to meet these terms," I continued, "then at Orwa 900 on Monday morning, a full certified copy of this photograph, along with your partner in crimes and the accompanying logbook, will be delivered to the Washington State Commission on Judicial Conduct, the Department of Defense Inspector General's office, and a few old friends of mine at the Seattle Times." I let a beat of silence hang in the air, heavy and absolute. "Consider this a settlement offer," I finished. "Officer to officer." The panic in his eyes blazed into pure rage. He threw his head back and laughed, a harsh, grating sound completely devoid of humor. "You think you can threaten me," he snarled, jabbing a finger at the photo. "With some ghost from 25 years ago, you have made a fatal mistake, little girl." He snatched the phone from his desk, his hand shaking with fury. "You think you're a soldier? You're just a stupid child playing dress-up," he screamed, his voice echoing in the large office. I stood my ground, my posture unwavering. "I am an officer of the United States Army," I replied, my voice dangerously quiet. "And you, sir, are an officer who disgraced the uniform." That was the final blow. His face contorted in a mask of pure hatred. He turned his back on me, stabbing numbers into his phone, already barking orders. "Get me Delaney, now. And get me everything you can find on military misconduct. Everything." I understood then. There would be no surrender. I had backed a cornered animal into a trap, and now it was going to lash out with all the power and venom it possessed. The war was no longer a series of skirmishes. It was now an open declaration. Have you ever had that one moment, that breaking point where you finally stood up to someone who had hurt you for years and reclaimed your power? If you have, please hit that like button to support this journey. And in the comments, just write, "I'm ready," if you're ready to see this fight through to the end. I turned, my back straight, my head held high. I walked out of his office through the silent gauntlet of his employees and didn't look back. The battle lines had been drawn, and I was ready. My father was not a man who bluffed. At 800 on Monday morning, the storm hit. My phone rang, and it was Clara, her voice tight with a mixture of fury and professional alarm. "Sonia, he didn't just counterattack. He launched a nuclear strike," she said, skipping any greeting. "He and Alcott have filed an emergency motion in federal court. They're claiming the footlocker contains classified documents that pose a clear and present danger to national security. They've invoked a little-known provision of the Homeland Security Act." My stomach clenched into a tight, cold knot. What does that mean exactly? It means they're petitioning for an immediate seizure of the evidence and a total gag order on you, me, and anyone else involved, Clara explained, her words coming fast. "Sonia, this is a brilliant and evil move. He's not just neutralizing your weapon, he's turning it against you. He's recasting this whole thing. You're no longer a daughter seeking justice. You're a potential national security threat. If you so much as mention the contents of those documents now, you could be prosecuted under the Espionage Act." It was a legal checkmate, a perfect trap. I was silenced, my hands tied by the very laws I had sworn to uphold. But the assault wasn't confined to the civilian courts. That afternoon, a new email appeared in my encrypted inbox. The sender was the Office of the Inspector General, U.S. Army JAG Corps. My heart felt like it stopped beating for a full second. The subject line was stark: "Inquiry regarding unauthorized possession of military documents." My hands trembled as I opened it. The language was formal, cold, and utterly terrifying. "Captain Weiss, it has come to our attention that you may be in possession of sensitive military materials obtained through unofficial channels. You are hereby ordered to cease and desist from any dissemination, discussion, or destruction of said materials. Prepare a full report on their origin and contents to be submitted to this office within 72 hours. I felt the air leave my lungs. Leonard had done it. He had created a perfect pincer movement. The civilian courts had gagged me, and now the military was investigating me. If I obeyed the court and stayed silent, I was defying a direct order from the Army. If I obeyed the Army and submitted a report, I was violating a federal gag order. Either way, my career was over. The sense of betrayal was profound, a physical ache in my chest. The Army, my family, my entire professional identity was now viewing me as a suspect. The war became a 24/7 siege. The dark sedan was no longer subtle. It was parked openly at the end of my street day and night, a constant silent reminder that I was being watched. The anonymous calls started, usually around 2 a.m., with nothing but static on the other end, just enough to shatter my sleep and fray my nerves. Then came the final turn of the screw. I went to pay my credit card bill online and was met with a blunt, red message. "Account frozen. Please contact customer service." A suspicious system error, the bank clerk called it. Leonard was systematically dismantling my life. He was cutting off my money, destroying my career, and grinding down my spirit. That night, I sat on the floor of my mother's dark living room, the damning file lying on the coffee table in front of me. It felt radioactive, a thing that was supposed to be my salvation now burning a hole in my life. For the first time since I'd put on the uniform, I felt utterly, completely defeated. Captain Sonia Weiss, the officer who always had a plan, the lawyer who always had an answer, was out of moves. The board was set against me. I was going to lose. In the depths of that despair, I remembered a book I'd read about Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg. I remembered how she won impossible battles not by launching frontal assaults, but by finding procedural weaknesses, small cracks in her opponent's moral and ethical armor. But I had no such leverage. I had nothing. Just as that thought crossed my mind, my phone buzzed on the floor beside me. A text from an unknown number. My first instinct was to ignore it, another harassment tactic. But the message was clear and direct. "This is Joyce, Judge Alcott's clerk. Can't talk long. Meet me at Bluebeard Coffee in 30 minutes. Come alone." My mind raced. This had to be a trap. A setup to further discredit me. It was reckless. It was stupid. But as I looked around the dark, silent room, I realized I had absolutely nothing left to lose. The cafe was a small, hip spot on 6th Avenue, filled with the rich aroma of roasting coffee and the quiet chatter of students. I found Joyce in a booth at the back. She was a woman in her mid-50s, with tired eyes and a nervous energy that made her constantly glance towards the door. She looked like 1,000 other career administrative assistants, the kind of person who becomes invisible in the halls of power. She didn't waste time on pleasantries. "I've worked for Judge Alcott for 15 years, she whispered, her hands trembling as she clutched her coffee cup. "I always knew he wasn't clean, but this is different. This is wrong." She pushed a small, nondescript flash drive across the table. "I've seen Leonard Wright coming into the judge's private chambers after hours, multiple times since this case started. No appointments, no records." She took a shaky breath. "On this drive are the financial statements for a shell corporation, a Delaware LLC. It's owned by your father's firm, and it's been making tuition payments directly to Stanford University for Judge Alcott's son for the past 2 years. She stood up abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor. "That's all I can do," she said, her eyes pleading with me to understand. "Good luck, Captain." And then she was gone, melting into the crowd. I sat there for a long moment, staring at the small piece of plastic and metal in my hand. It was an impossible gift from an unlikely ally. It wasn't the powerful weapon I had tried to use. It was something better. It was a silver bullet. Joyce's flash drive changed the entire battlefield. I met Clara at her office that evening, and as she clicked through the files, spreadsheets, bank transfers, incorporation documents, a slow, fierce grin spread across her face. "This is it, Sonia," she said, her eyes gleaming in the glow of the monitor. "This is their Achilles heel. Forget Blue Harbor. Trying to prove a conspiracy from 25 years ago with potentially classified documents is a legal minefield. But proving contemporary bribery of a sitting judge? That's not a minefield. That's a parking lot. It's simple, direct, and devastating." A new battle plan emerged, one based on the Powell Doctrine I had studied at West Point. Apply overwhelming force at the enemy's weakest and most decisive point. We would execute a classic flanking maneuver. Publicly, we would agree to their motion. We'd consent to have the footlocker sealed, showing our full compliance with the court and the military. While they were busy fortifying the front gate, we would be coming over the back wall. Our counterattack would be twofold. First, we filed a formal complaint with the Washington State Commission on Judicial Conduct, attaching the entire contents of the flash drive. Second, we filed a motion for the immediate recusal of Judge Alcott from our case, citing gross judicial misconduct and an irreconcilable conflict of interest. We weren't just asking him to step aside, we were accusing him of a crime. Predictably, with their primary objective seemingly achieved, they made a move they thought was a final checkmate. My father's lawyer, Delaney, called Clara. Unaware that we had Joyce's silver bullet, they thought they had already won. "Clara," he began, his voice oozing with condescending victory. "Leonard is feeling generous. He's willing to drop all this nonsense, release the full inheritance to your client. All he wants in return is the footlocker and a signed NDA. Simple." "No deal, Delaney," Clara said flatly. There was a pause. Delaney was clearly surprised. "All right," he said, shifting tactics. "Let's talk numbers. To make this all go away, my client is prepared to offer your client a cash settlement. $200,000 on top of the estate. Tax-free." Later that night, Clara called me, playing devil's advocate as a good lawyer should. "Sonia, you need to seriously consider this. It's an exit ramp. You can walk away from all of this right now with a significant amount of money. You can be free." I looked out my window at the familiar Tacoma rain, the drops tracing silver paths down the dark glass. Free? Freedom bought with silence felt like another kind of prison. My mother hadn't endured a lifetime of quiet sacrifice for me to sell her honor for a bribe. No, Clara, I said, my voice quiet but absolute. My oath isn't for sale. My mother's integrity isn't for sale. We fight. The recusal hearing took place not in a grand courtroom, but in a small, suffocating hearing room in the federal building. There was no jury, no press, just us, my father's legal team, and a senior presiding judge. A stern-faced woman named Judge Carmichael. Judge Alcott sat at the respondent's table, not on the bench. For the first time, he was the one under scrutiny. My father and his team radiated a smug confidence. They assumed this was a desperate, last-ditch delay tactic. They were relaxed, whispering jokes to each other. They had no idea they were walking into an ambush. Clara began methodically, laying the groundwork. She presented a timeline of ex parte communications, private meetings and phone calls between my father and Judge Alcott, all logged by the meticulous Joyce. Delaney, my father's lawyer, stood up, looking bored. Your Honor, this is absurd. These are two old friends, former colleagues. A casual conversation is not grounds for recusal. Judge Alcott nodded in agreement, a patronizing smile on his face. Indeed, I failed to see the conflict counsel. He attempted to portray himself as the victim of a frivolous accusation. He spoke of his long, unblemished career, the unfortunate misunderstanding by an overzealous young attorney. Me. That's when Clara looked at me and gave a subtle nod. It was time. I stood up. My hands were steady. My voice when I spoke was clear and cold. I did not look at my father. My eyes were locked on Judge Alcott. Your Honor, I said, addressing Judge Carmichael but never breaking eye contact with Alcott. I have just one question for Judge Alcott. Sir, could you please explain the series of payments made from a corporation named Northwest Holdings, LLC, into your son's tuition account at Stanford University? The air in the room became thick and still. The smug confidence on the faces of my father and Alcott evaporated, replaced by a ghastly, uniformed expression of pure horror. Their eyes darted from me to each other, a silent, frantic exchange of panic. Clara, without a word, walked to the front of the room and plugged the USB drive into the court's presentation system. With a click, the screen on the wall lit up. It was a bank statement from Northwest Holdings, LLC. And there it was, line by line, for everyone to see. A transfer of $18,000, dated 3 months ago, sent directly to the Stanford University bursar's office. The memo line read, Tuition payment, Alcott J. Judge Carmichael stared at the screen for a long, silent moment. Then she slowly turned her gaze to the man at the respondent's table. Her voice was like ice. Judge Alcott, she said, do you have anything to say? Alcott opened his mouth, but no sound came out. The color had drained from his face. He looked at my father, a desperate, pleading look. But my father wasn't looking at him. He was staring at me, his expression a mixture of disbelief and raw hatred. In the military, we have a term for this, a catastrophic failure of leadership. I had another term for it, justice. The line had been breached. Their defenses had crumbled. The game was over. The aftermath of the recusal hearing was swift and silent. There was no dramatic courtroom confession, no public spectacle. Power collapses not with a bang, but with a quiet, frantic shuffling of paper. News of Judge Alcott's recusal and the subsequent investigation by the Commission on Judicial Conduct spread through the Washington legal community like wildfire. A week later, a small article appeared on page A12 of the News Tribune. State Judge Richard Alcott announces sudden retirement due to health concerns. It was a polite fiction, a face-saving exit that everyone in the know understood for what it was. The end. With his primary accomplice neutralized and facing disbarment, my father's position was untenable. He surrendered, unconditionally. The official notification came in an email from his lawyer to Clara. It was a formal document, stripped of all emotion. All motions against me were withdrawn. All claims to my mother's estate were relinquished. All terms of her original will were to be executed immediately. Attached was a scanned, signed apology, a sterile lawyer-drafted paragraph devoid of any genuine remorse, but it was a victory nonetheless. I was in the courthouse elevator with Clara when she got the email. She read it, then simply turned her phone towards me. I read the words, and a strange thing happened. I felt nothing. Just a vast, quiet emptiness. The battle was over. The war was won. Leaning back against the cool metal wall of the descending elevator, I felt the rigid control I'd maintained for months finally break. Tears streamed down my face, hot and silent. It wasn't a cry of sadness or even joy. It was the cry of pure, unadulterated release, the sound of a soldier finally laying down a burden that had grown too heavy to carry. That evening, he called me. The caller ID flashed with his name, a name I hadn't seen on my phone in years. I hesitated, then answered, putting the phone on speaker and setting it on the kitchen counter. I didn't want his voice that close to my ear. His tone was alien. The arrogance, the command, the condescension. It was all gone. In its place was the thin, desperate voice of a broken man. "Sonia," he started, his voice cracking. "Sonia, I'm sorry. I was wrong. About everything." I listened to the sound of the rain against the window, a steady, soothing rhythm. Is there a way we can start over?" he pleaded. "I'm still your father." I thought of my mother, sitting alone in the high school bleachers. I thought of her slumped over the kitchen table, drowning in bills. I thought of the cold dismissal in his voice at that Thanksgiving table. All the years of hoping, of waiting for a scrap of affection, of wishing he would be the father I needed him to be. It all coalesced into a single, painful, and liberating truth. The anger was gone. The rage that had fueled me for weeks had burned itself out, leaving behind only the cold ashes of acceptance. "No, Leonard," I said, my voice calm and steady. The use of his first name was deliberate. It was a line drawn in the sand. "We can't." "Sonia, please, don't destroy me," he begged. "It's already done," I replied, not with malice, but with a simple statement of fact. "And you were the one who did it. I forgive you," I said, the words feeling strange and new in my mouth. "I forgive you not for your sake, but for mine. I need to be at peace." I took a breath. "But I can't have you in my life. Goodbye." I ended the call before he could reply. It was the hardest thing I'd ever done, and the most necessary. It was the final act of my own liberation. A few days later, a moving truck delivered the footlocker. It looked smaller somehow, sitting in the middle of the living room. I knelt before it and opened the lid. This time, I wasn't searching for an arsenal. I was looking for my mother. I gently lifted out the contents, one by one. Her neatly folded Air Force dress blues. A small box of medals, including a meritorious service medal I'd never seen before. Photographs of her as a young woman, surrounded by friends in uniform, all of them smiling. And tucked into a side pocket, I found it. A formal certificate of commendation. It was for outstanding achievement in signals intelligence during a period of critical national importance. It was the truth, on paper, that Leonard had tried so hard to bury. I had done more than just win a lawsuit. I had reclaimed my mother's identity. I had restored her honor. She wasn't a failed woman. She was a quiet hero. My mother used to keep a well-worn Bible on her nightstand, and a particular verse she had underlined came back to me then, from the book of Micah. "What does the Lord require of you? To act justly and to love mercy and to walk humbly with your God." That was the code she lived by. Justice and mercy. Sitting there on the floor, surrounded by the tangible proof of my mother's hidden life, I finally understood her true legacy. It wasn't in this house or in her small savings account. It was in the logbook, a testament to her integrity. It was in her final letter to me, a testament to her love. It was in the unwavering moral compass of a woman who chose honor over safety, truth over silence. She had taught me the greatest lesson of all, that a soldier doesn't fight for what is in front of them, but for what they leave behind. And in that quiet, peaceful moment, I knew exactly what I had to do to carry that legacy forward. 6 months later, I was back in uniform, back in my office at Fort Bragg. On the surface, everything was the same. The familiar rhythm of military life, the demanding caseload, the scent of strong coffee in the morning. But I was not the same. The battle I fought in Tacoma had forged something new in me. It hadn't made me bitter or cynical, as my mother had feared. It had sharpened me. It had deepened my understanding of what justice truly means. It had made me a better officer. The experience had planted a seed of purpose in me, and with Clara's help, I was determined to make it grow. Using a portion of the inheritance, my mother's hard-earned money, we established a new pro bono program under the Washington State Bar Association. We called it the Elena Foster Initiative. Its mission was simple: to provide free legal services to female veterans facing injustice in the civilian world. Women who, like my mother, had served their country with honor only to come home and face a different kind of war. Quiet, isolating battles fought in courtrooms and conference rooms, far from any recognized field of combat. I wasn't just managing my mother's estate, I was making it live and breathe. My life found a new, richer cadence. I worked my cases for the Army with renewed vigor, but now my evenings and weekends were filled with calls and emails for the initiative, collaborating with Clara to help women who had nowhere else to turn. As for my father and Judge Alcott, their worlds had unraveled. I didn't follow the specifics obsessively, but the news trickled down through the legal grapevine. Alcott was disbarred. Leonard was forced to step down as senior partner at his firm, his reputation in tatters. Justice, in its slow, grinding way, had been served. But I found that I took no pleasure in their downfall. They were no longer titans casting long shadows over my life. They were just men, flawed and broken by their own choices. They had become a part of my past, and my focus was firmly on the future. One crisp autumn afternoon, I found myself standing in a lecture hall at the JAG School in Charlottesville, Virginia. I'd been invited to speak to a class of new officers, the next generation of military lawyers. Standing at the podium, looking out at their eager, intelligent faces, I saw a reflection of my younger self. I didn't tell them my story, not exactly. Instead, I presented it as a case study, a hypothetical scenario stripped of names and personal details. I laid out the facts: a junior officer, a corrupt system, a fight to defend the honor of a deceased soldier. We talked about legal ethics and the rules of professional conduct, but then I set my notes aside. There will come a time in your career, I said, my voice clear and strong in the quiet hall, when you will face a choice. Not a choice between legal and illegal. That's the easy part. You'll face a choice between the easy path and the right one, between what is convenient and what is just. Everything in our world, every incentive, will push you towards the easy path. But our oath, the one we all took, demands more. It demands that we choose the right path. Always. I looked into their eyes and I saw understanding. I saw respect. I saw the spark of the same fire that my mother had passed on to me. In that moment, I knew I was continuing her legacy in the most meaningful way possible. I wasn't just a lawyer, I was becoming a leader, living the ideal of servant leadership. That true leaders serve the needs of others first. I still kept my mother's little house in Tacoma. I would fly back on long weekends, leaving the dry heat of North Carolina for the cool, damp air of the Pacific Northwest. I'd work in her garden, pulling weeds from the flower beds and feeling the rich soil between my fingers. The house was a sanctuary, a place of profound peace where I could feel her presence in the quiet moments. On the last day of one of those visits, I put on my Army service uniform one more time. I drove out to Tahoma National Cemetery, the sprawling military burial ground nestled among the tall pines. The air was clean and smelled of evergreen and damp earth. I found her headstone easily. It was a simple, elegant piece of white marble, just like all the others, a testament to the fact that in service and in death, all are equal. The inscription was modest, just as she would have wanted. Elena Foster, Technical Sergeant, U.S. Air Force. There was no mention of the lives she saved, the secrets she kept, or the silent war she won. But I knew. I knelt and placed a small bouquet of white daisies at the base of the stone. "I did it, Mom," I whispered, my voice catching in my throat. I got the story out. I straightened up, instinctively coming to a position of attention. Mission complete. A gentle breeze rustled the leaves of the tall fir trees surrounding the plot, a sound like a soft, approving sigh. I stood there for a long time, not in grief, but in gratitude. The fight had cost me dearly, but it had given me something precious in return. It had given me my mother, and it had given me myself. I was no longer just Elena Foster's daughter, fighting to reclaim a stolen past. I was Captain Sonia Weiss, a lawyer, a soldier, and the proud guardian of another soldier's legacy. Thank you for listening to my story. My fight for my mother's legacy taught me that our true inheritance isn't what's left to us, but what's left inside of us. It's the courage to speak up, the integrity to choose the right path, and the strength to turn our deepest wounds into a source of help for others. If you believe in that kind of legacy, please like this story and subscribe to our channel to hear more tales of resilience. And finally, I'd be honored if you would share this with someone who needs to be reminded of their own strength. Thank you for being part of this mission.